Welcome back to another episode of Story Behind the Story. John Walker here once again, this time joined by Tucker Franklin. He has been on here before, and now he's kind of replacing Andrew Wegley in the sports role. Speaking of the sports article he wrote this week, it was a feature about the head tennis coach, Marc Roseville. Yep. What was your motivation behind this, Tucker? An interesting guy, to say the least. I've had the chance to talk to him some myself, but what was your motivation to really nail this one down and feature Rosie?
Yeah, very much so. Rosie's a very interesting guy. Obviously, that's what attracted me to this tennis beat, really. It was one of the leftover beats, after everyone picked. I picked it up as my second one. I covered Northwest softball, too. I believe that's what you had me on here before.
Yep.
And we had talked about Northwest softball. But coming into the season, we knew Rosie was getting close to his 1,100th win. And that was really one of the big things I wanted to talk about, was getting 1,100 wins. And I did the math for that. And if you do 1,100 wins, you'd have to get a win every day for more than 3 years to collect 1,100 wins in tennis. It's impressive.
Pretty impressive, to say the least.
Uh-huh.
And then throughout the interview process, we talked about he's an interesting person. What is something you learned about him just as a person that the average eye might not see?
I talked to a lot of former players now. He has a very large coaching tree in tennis, and he's at UNK as the coach used to play at Northwest.
Yep.
Drury's coach used to play at Northwest. I talked to Jared Smith down at Drury, and he said that Rosie really created that family atmosphere when he was here in the 2000s, and that really all started with him, and that started the change in culture really at Northwest. Mel Churchman came in for the football program kind of around that time too, and shifted the family culture as well. So they really just carried that from the program. Rosie's a very interesting cat. I know we've already said that 4 or 5 times, but Jared Smith told me in the process of when he was coming, because he's a Lee Summit native, he saw Rosie at the mall one time when he was in high school. And Rosie was selling his baseball card collection. Big baseball card, vintage baseball card collector, Marc Roseville is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then to go along with that interesting thing about Rosie, 1,600 words roughly in your article, in your feature. Right. What is something alongside that you just quite didn't get the chance to put in your feature?
Well, that's a great question, John. One of my favorite stories about him, this actually is in my article. I do want to talk more about this one, and then I'll tell you another story, is Ben McCollum just won his second national championship. Big story going around.
Wilt Chamberlain story?
No, not the Wilt Chamberlain story. That's a whole completely other story that he's done. But in Ben McCollum's second year, he was in the mix of a 10-16 season. Not very great. Ben McCollum, last 3 years has been 105. Guy's a great coach. It is towards the end of the basketball season, and Ben McCollum's second year, I believe it was 2010, was Ben McCollum's second year. Marc Roseville walks into his office, doesn't say a word, writes, "If you don't believe in yourself, then who can?" on the board, and then just walks out without saying a word to Ben McCollum. And now, if you look at Ben now, he's a 2-time national champion.
He's had 105 record over
Right.
the past 3 years.
Over the past 3 years, and I think Marc Roseville really embraces that family mantra just within all sports and everything at Northwest, and he is very humbled. At the dedication ceremony, he said that it was the best day of his life when they renamed the Marc Roseville Tennis Center after him. So he loves the university. He loves everything about it. He's a Bearcat for life, even though he went to UCM.
Once a Bearcat for life. Once a Bearcat, always a Bearcat.
Very true.
After talking to him, if you could see him coaching any other sport on campus besides tennis, what would it be?
Man, that's actually interesting because he wanted to be a wrestling coach. Out of college, he said he wanted to be a wrestling coach. That was his goal, was to be a wrestling coach. Now 27 MIAA Coach of the Year titles later.
And he's a tennis coach.
He's a tennis coach. Might be one of the greatest tennis coaches of all time in the MIAA, for sure. Could be in the conversation for greatest Northwest coach of all time.
So that is going to wrap things up for this episode of Story Behind the Story. For Marc Roseville, culture wins, the motto, once a Bearcat, always a Bearcat for Rosie. What a beautiful story. Make sure to check out Tucker's full feature on Marc Roseville. That's going to wrap things up for this episode of Story Behind the Story. We will catch you next time on the KNWT Channel 8 YouTube exclusive.